Hi, I'm Michael Green, the founder of Lynit. I'm going to walk you through the basics of our tool, then you'll be telling your best story in no time. Writing in Lynit is broken down into three stages: premise, outlining, and writing. The premise is the core of your story. If you give a two-sentence pitch or summary of the story, the premise is everything you would mention. For our example story of the tortoise and the hare, we have a tortoise is fed up with being teased for walking slowly and challenges an overconfident hare to a race. There are three main actions in the premise, and they are summarized in our premise summary. The first is defining the premise drivers. Drivers are the story elements that show up on the page, like characters, arcs, events, themes, and setting. We define the premise drivers by adding them to the premise. We already have the tortoise here, but we can drag in the main plot and the hare. Lynit also expects there to be at least one TSM in the premise, and so which is short for theme, setting, and motif. So let's add the theme of slow and steady. We can create it from the create a story element button and click TSM. We can name this slow and steady. The second action are adding the relationships between the premise drivers. So let's start with opening the tortoise. We can scroll down to see its relationships. Relationships are either supporting or opposing, which globally mean they are either in harmony and help each other overcome their weaknesses, or they are in conflict and attack each other's weaknesses. So for the tortoise and the theme of slow and steady is supporting. But for different driver types, the relationships can be protagonist or antagonist, which have the same general meaning. In this case, the tortoise is the protagonist. And similarly, between characters, you can be allies or opponent. In this scenario, they are opponents. For these recommended relationships, they can also be created through the visualization. So we can do that here as well. So between the hare and the plot, he's an antagonist. Between the theme and the hare is opposing the theme. And in the particular case of this story, we can open the plot, and the relationship between the plot and the theme is that the plot actually supports the theme because the tortoise does win in the end. So we can say that it's supporting. And so we've completed the basics of adding the relationships between the drivers. The third action is outlining the beats in these relationships. The premise is expecting that each relationship to have at least one beat which represents it in the story. So let's start with the main arc. Now, the main arc has three different relationships, and we need to add beats to them. Now, there's already some beats created that are already captured in these relationships. So the one that's missing currently is for slow and steady. Now, we could create a new beat there, or we can take a beat that already exists. Now, the beat here for the tortoise wins the race against the hare after the hare takes a nap, that beat also captures the theme of slow and steady. So we already have a driver of this beat of the tortoise peaceful walks because it's in this driver, but we can add additional drivers. So if we add slow and steady, this will add it to this relationship and be an example of that. But in this particular beat's case, this beat is also driven by the hare who's taking the nap and by the tortoise. So there's actually a beat that captures all the relationships. in the premise. So we can see it in the relationship between the arc and the theme here, but it's also between the arc and the hare and the arc and the tortoise as well. So now we set up the premise. Next, let's move on to outlining. Outlining will be reusing the same actions we've seen during the premise. We will create drivers, we will capture relationships, and we will outline beats. The only difference here is that we will focus on secondary drivers, which are drivers who have relationships to a premise driver, and minor drivers, which have no relationship to premise drivers. So if we wanted to add a new side character called the mouse, we would create it here, and it would initially be a minor character because it has no relationship to premise drivers. But if we did want to at least make this mouse a bit more supporting, we can add a relationship to the hare, which is in the premise, and say maybe they're friends. And this will promote the mouse to being a secondary because it has a relationship to a premise driver. But so in outlining, we will go through and add all the drivers that we need, flush out their relationships, and define new beats as needed. And if we want to add any other elements that support it, we can. And keep in mind that if two drivers drive the same beat, they have a relationship. So if you haven't created that relationship already, we will create it for you. So for example, between the mouse and the fox driving this beat, that will create a relationship. Now, we don't know which type of relationship to create for you, so it'll be created with missing a relationship type, and then you can specify it yourself. And in this case, we can say they're opponents. But that beat that they both drive is there. Then the final stage is writing. Here, we've already created some chapters and we put some beats into them. But we can add any new beats as needed. We can type a new beat here to add it, or we can drag an existing beat. Let's drag one of the beats we recently created, the one that we called new beats, and we can just drag it into a chapter, or whichever chapter we want. And then it's there. And then when we're ready, we can enter a chapter. We'll have our beats here, and we can begin writing. We can focus and only look at the beats and the chapter text, or if we want, we can just have the chapter text and a visualization in order to keep in mind who's there, but focus on the writing. And that's the basics of Lynit.